Hi guys, it's Lara. Thank you all for watching and welcome back to my channel. I have for you today a new, very beginner friendly and very detailed tutorial. We're gonna be making a pillowcase for this Wedge pillow behind me, which is a pillow I bought myself 2 years ago when I had my breast explant surgery. And I've been told that it's helpful to lay a little bit elevated at the beginning, and later I moved it into this room because I actually found out that this is super comfy, because sometimes I like to lay here in this room and to read, and this is perfect. But I actually never got a cover for this pillow and I never made one, and it looked kind of naked and unfinished and I didn't like it, and I thought it was about time. By the way, if you are interested in my breast explant journey, I have an entire playlist on my vlogging channel, so I will link it here in the right corner and also down below. And now let's go on with this tutorial. The only skills that you will need for this project is to be able to sew straight and to use zigzag, and anything else will be explained in this video. So if you want to know how to make a pillowcase for a wedge pillow, then please keep watching. Before we start though, let me tell you shortly about my own platform for sewing beginners. So it's also called Sewing Lara, and there are 3 courses. The first course is for hand stitching. It introduces different types of needles and buttons, and it also teaches you how to do basic embroidery techniques. The second course is all about sewing machine, all the basics you need to know in order to get started, how to do maintenance and how to, for example, fix faulty stitches. And the third course is sewing for beginners, step by step, very easy. I just started working on the third course and I'm continuously adding new videos, so if that's something that might be interesting for you, you're welcome to check it out. I will link the platform down below in the video description. And now let's jump into today's tutorial. Since I did not have a sewing pattern for my pillow, I had to come up with a pattern myself. So I'm gonna make a sketch of the wedge pillow and I'm gonna explain how I came up with the pattern. So the way the wedge pillow is built is that this is the longest side. So let's say this is the length A. This is the width of the pillow. Let's make it B. Then we have the bottom, that is C. And then we have the back side, and that would be D. So we have 4 measurements that I had to keep in mind. So the sides were actually pretty easy. So we had the length or the measurement A. Then we have the back side, which is D, and then we had C. So these 3 measurements gave me the pattern size for the side of the pillow. To be honest, I was a little bit too lazy to draw it, so instead of doing it like a decent human being, I simply put the pillow with the side down on the fabric and I outlined the edges, and that's why the pattern wasn't perfect, and then later I had to cut something back. So do it the right way, simply make a sketch on your pattern paper, you'll thank me later. So anyway, so when I had this triangle that had the correct measurements, or if I have done it that way, then you have to account for seam allowance. So I'm gonna grab a liner in another color. So you have to go about 1 centimeter around the actual shape, and this is going to be your seam allowance. So that's the side piece. And now this large rectangle here is what I needed for the rest of the pillow. So B times A is this surface. I called it rectangle number 1, so that's what we have here. Then we have the back side of the pillow, which is D times B, so that's rectangle number 2, so that's the back side basically. And then we have also the bottom of the pillow, and that is C times B. And then you will realize that there are 2 extra rectangles on each side, and that's because I wanted the fabric to overlap on the back. so that I wouldn't have to use a zipper. It was 7 inches on one side and 4 inches on the other side. And this red frame, that's of course seam allowance. So this is how I came up with the sewing pattern for my wedge pillow. Alright, so I cut out the side pieces and the main rectangular piece out of this gray fabric with a star pattern. I personally find that, especially in the beginning, it's really helpful to use some kind of a pattern that forms at least somewhat lines, because it's easier to align the fabric. It's easier to notice whether everything is straight or not until you kind of get the eye for it. And also it's gonna help you to sew straight, because it's gonna be easier to follow the lines that the pattern forms. So I have here 2 of these side sections, and then I grabbed the main rectangle and I folded it over the pillow the way I want it to be aligned. So what I want is that it's gonna overlap here on the top, and I already pinned it in place. And I'll be folding the ends of both the bottom layer and the top layer twice inwards, but I have enough fabric here. And the way I folded it, I pinned it in place, and then I grabbed my scissors and I made on each side a little cut where the top of the triangle was, then both of these bottom corners. I also made a little cut where the top layer is going to align with this layer, and I made a little cut in the corner here on the top layer so that I know where the fold is going to start. It's gonna make more sense in a second. To make it more understandable, I spread here the sheet of fabric. I placed the pillow on the top so that I would have here a little bit shorter section on this side where the top of the pillow is, and the longer section is on the other side. And I will now fold it over the pillow and smoothen it nicely. And it goes almost to the top. And now I will fold this section over it. So this is how I want my pillow to be put inside of the rectangle of the fabric. So I told you that the ends are going to be folded twice inwards. So when I do it, I will know how far this section will go once it's gonna be edged. So I made a little cut here on this side, and then I followed the row of stars with which this cut aligns, and I could make the cut also on the other side. So now I'm gonna fold the fabric that much inwards. I'm gonna put a pin here on this side, on the other side, and also somewhere in the center. It's gonna be easier. And now I'm gonna turn the pillow towards us. Again, I will make sure that the fabric is nicely smoothened. And we have our fold on the shorter end that we can now align with this section, right? So I'm not gonna mind here the end that I'm gonna edge later. For me, it's more important to know where this part will be aligned. So when I align it like so, I will make sure that it's nicely aligned with a row of stars. And that gave me, again, cut on both left and right side. And this is where the fabric will be aligned once everything will be sewn together in place. And I made sure that this is not too tight, because there won't be any buttons or any snaps. There won't be any zipper. It's just gonna be folded over. And if that would be too tight, this would be kind of open, because it would be pulled by these sides. So it's really important that it's nicely smoothened and that it's flat, but the bottom of the pillow and this side should not be pulling on this fabric, if that makes any sense. So now I have these marks. I also have the marks now for the corners of the pillow here on the top, as I mentioned, and here in the corners and on the other side. So I will leave the pins in, even though I already have my cuts, and I can unfold this for the time being. And the first step will be to make the edges. So I can take the pins out again now, and I will fold this over like so, and I would put in pins at an angle from the right side. I will start here. I will make sure that the cut is exactly the end of the fold, and with the help of the star pattern I can very quickly fold the edge inwards. If you're having a hard time with this, you can put the pins in first from this side, simply like so, and make a nice fold. And what I also like doing is I like grabbing both ends and measuring them, making sure they are the same width, and then you can do the same here with a few places, or you simply grab your measuring tape and you measure and make sure that the edge is the same width everywhere. You just can, you know, measure it on several places, and that way you will know you were working accurately. Now I'm gonna fold in the other edge as well. And now that the edge has been folded in place, I can turn the fabric over and I can start putting in pins at an angle. The distance between the pins that I like keeping when I'm pinning at an angle is about 2 inches. And once I have pins along the entire length, I can remove the pins that I put in originally from the other side. So that means once I pinned everything at an angle, I can remove the original pins. Now both our edges were folded twice inwards, and both are pinned so that the pins are at an angle. So the next step is to go to the sewing machine, and we have to sew straight through this edge. And my goal is to sew about like 2 millimeters away from this inside edge, but we're gonna be sewing from this side, so we will have to make sure that we align the sewing foot and the needle correctly in order to get to the point where we want to be sewing through. And so that it's gonna be a little bit easier for us, I'm going to put a pin through exactly in the distance where I want to be sewing. I'm gonna do it on the top and also on the other side, just to be clear. I threaded my sewing machine with a matching gray thread. This thread looks quite dark, but when you unfold it and place it on the fabric, it's actually the perfect shade that I personally like on that pattern. And I have a matching color also on my bobbin. I set my machine to straight stitch. The needle is right now completely on the left, and I will change the standard settings of the straight stitch to a half a point longer. So the standard would be 2.5 on my machine, so I'm gonna make it 3, which means half a point longer. So let's close the top. And now I will place the fabric inside of my sewing machine, and I have here this pin that marks how far from this edge I want to be sewing. And when I lower the sewing foot, I can clearly see that if I go a little bit inward, like a tiny little bit more inside than the edge of the sewing foot, that is actually exactly the distance. But it would be kind of weird to align the sewing foot light, so it's so much easier when you align the sewing foot exactly with the edge, so that the edge of the sewing foot will go over the edge of what you're sewing. So now I will move the needle a little bit to the right. I will lower it slowly, manually, to see if it goes towards the pin, and that's actually perfect. So only half a point more to the right did the trick. So now I'm gonna set up my machine so that it would do the sew up and that it would also cut the thread at the beginning. I will lower the needle, and now that the needle is securely inside of the fabric, I can remove this pin. And I will start sewing. So first the machine is going to do the sew up, and you have probably noticed that I didn't align this edge exactly with the window. I made sure that the edge was a little bit further in the back so that the machine would not be eating the fabric. So now the sew up was done and we can continue sewing. And here we have our seam. So here's what it looks like from the right side and from the wrong side. And now I'm gonna grab the other end. I also have here the marks, and I will align the edge of the sewing foot with the edge of the fold, and I can already see that this is a little bit wider, so I can go with the needle back where it was, and I can actually even move a little bit further to the right. So I will align this edge with this line, and that should be actually perfect. So I'll lower the needle, I will remove this pin, and we can start sewing. And here we have this seam, and that's the wrong side. So now that both ends were edged, I folded the fabric again over the pillow. I made sure that all marks were aligned with each corner correctly. And now I have pinned here these ends in place. I put pins in at an angle, so I pinned the edge that overlaps in place, and then I grabbed the end of the fabric that's inside and I also pinned it in place on both sides. And now I'm gonna go downstairs and iron this entire sheet. What I want to have is, I want to have a clear ironed edge for the top and for both bottom edges, and I also want the fabric to be nicely smooth before we continue working. Now everything is ironed, so you can see here these nice crispy edges. And I also ironed the side pieces, because once we will be done, I won't have to iron the entire pillow again. So the next step is to go to the sewing machine, and I will sew these two pieces in place. So basically just over the section that overlaps, I'm gonna go close to the edge through with a straight stitch in order to keep this in place, because then I can't confuse it and fold it in the wrong way, because it's gonna be sewn together, and yeah, again, I can't make any mistake there. The sewing machine settings are the same, so it's the straight stitch, the needle can remain completely to the left, and I will keep the length 3. So I will move the fabric in, I will align the edge of the sewing foot with the edge of the fabric, and I will start sewing exactly where the end of this edge is, and the machine is gonna do the sew up for me, so nothing changes. So this is our seam. I can now remove the pins, and here is what it looks on the wrong side. And I'm gonna do the same on the other side, and then we'll continue with the side pieces. So now that this is sewn together, I can turn the fabric to the wrong side. And we have to keep in mind where the top is. So this is the top. This is the bottom corner of the shorter side, and this is the bottom corner of the longer side. And now that the fabric has been turned to the wrong side, I will start pinning in these side sections. So I made a mark here so that I knew where the point was, and I'm gonna align it like so. And for the time being, I will put in the pins just the regular way. And I will make sure I align the sides the correct way. So I turned the piece to the wrong side, and I already pinned in one of the side sections. So we're gonna do it together on the other side. So just so you see, the top section is now basically inside, because when I turn the piece to the right side, it's gonna be outside. And I made sure that I aligned all the corners the correct way. So this is the side that's the shorter side, from top to bottom. Here we have the bottom of the pillow, and this is the longer side. So that's why I have here these marks, because that made it very easy to determine which piece goes to where. So, and I will start aligning the sides of the triangular sections for the sides with this. I noticed that when I was making the sketch of this, that I added a little bit too much seam allowance on the top, so I will have to chop off a little bit of the extra fabric around the top corner, but that's okay. That's something that happens very often when you make your own pattern, when you kind of wing it. It's not a bad thing. This is something you can easily adjust. So I will continue pinning this in place. I think at this point you got the idea. When I turn it, this is what I meant with the extra piece. I will have to chop this off, but that's okay. And then once I'll be done with pinning, we can go together to the sewing machine and sew these pieces in place. I personally find that whenever you are sewing pieces like this that are 3D, it makes more sense to turn the fabric so from the side where the cut is, because you can sew to this corner, then flip the fabric like so, and then continue sewing like so here. And that way you will make sure that there won't be any folds. So even though I pinned it in from this side, I will have to turn the fabric and put the pins from the other side, but it doesn't matter because I wanted to put them in at an angle anyway. And this might sound like some extra work, and maybe for some of you it sounds like, okay, this is way too complicated, why didn't you put in the pins at an angle first? But I honestly find that when I don't have an exact pattern, when it's a pattern that I made myself, that it allows me to work more precisely when I put in the pins aligned with the edge first. And then again, I can adjust everything, cut back whatever needs to be cut back, and then I move in the pins at an angle. Also, once the pins are put in at an angle, very often they go a little bit further than the edge, and if I need to cut something back, I would have to move them a little bit backwards, because you never want to cut over the pins, because that could damage your scissors. So that's another reason why I like doing it that way. That's of course something that's more my personal preference. I'm not saying this is the only correct way how to do it, but this is what works for me the best. Alright, now let's do this together. So the settings of my sewing machine are the same. We have straight stitch, the needle position is completely on the left side, and the stitch length is 3. And I'm gonna start sewing here where this corner is. So I'm gonna go exactly into the corner, but I'm gonna move a little bit more inwards because I have here this pin and I'm afraid I might hit the head. So I will sew around this corner then when I come from the other side. So I will move in and go a little bit inwards so that I'm away from the head of the needle. I will lower the needle. Now the fabric is secure. I can adjust everything. You can see the head of the needle is here in the back. Everything is safe and we can start sewing. And I will align the edge with the edge of the fabric, so the right edge of the sewing foot. Now here we are approaching the corner. So what I want is, I want the seam to reach exactly this corner, to this point. And now I'm going to lift the sewing foot and turn the fabric until I'll be able to continue sewing here. Now we approached the corner where we started sewing, so I made sure I pulled the needle a little bit out so that the head wouldn't be in the way. Now I hit the corner. I'm gonna adjust the fabric and turn the fabric at an angle, and then I will finish the seam where I started. That did not start exactly in the corner, and I will do the sew up. Pins are now removed, and I can also cut back the edges very close to the edge of the seam, but I will make sure that I don't cut through the seam. So I'll do this in each edge. Cutting back the fabric when you have edges like this is really important when you're turning the piece then to the right side, because if you would leave the entire fabric here and you would turn the piece to the right side, there would be a lot of fabric squeezed in and the shape of the edge would not be so precise and so nice. Whereas when I turn this to the right side, this is all the fabric that's going to be folded inwards, so the shape's going to be much nicer. And now I can go ahead and set my machine to zigzag, and I'm going to edge also this so that it wouldn't fray. Even though this is inside of the pillow, no one's gonna see it, but it's still much nicer. The standard settings for zigzag on my sewing machine are following: width 3.5, length 1.4, but that's not what I want. I'm gonna make the stitch much wider because I have quite a big seam allowance, so let's make it maximum. That will be 7. And I'm gonna make the stitch much longer. I'm gonna go for, let's say, 1.8, and I'll make a few stitches and see what it looks like. If necessary, I'll make it even a bit longer, so probably 2, but we'll see. So let's go ahead, and I'm gonna align the sewing foot so that the right edge of the zigzag sewing foot window is aligned with the edge of the fabric. And it looks like the length of the stitch is quite okay. I can leave it like that, so it's 1.8. I have sewn in also the other side, and now we can turn the pillow to the right side. And here it is. And now let's hope I will somehow squeeze the pillow in, but it is actually quite soft. And it should be possible, but I will have to use a little bit of force. That's what she said. All right, the plan worked. So this is the back side. Here we have the side. and here is the pillow from the front. Now, looking at the back side, I think it would be probably a good idea to put two either buttons in, or in this case, because it's already sewn together, simply snaps, because then it's gonna be a little bit flatter, because since this is at an angle, this tends to hang kind of loose. I mean, it wouldn't bother me because this is going to be the side that's gonna be next to the wall. But should I ever want to turn it, I think it would bug me. So I will go ahead and I will make two marks here somewhere, and I will hand stitch on snaps. I went ahead and I have stitched on snaps on the back side on two places. It's 7 inches from each side, and it's just these plastic snaps. They are super flat. And of course, if that were a freestanding pillow, I would probably not even made this fold. I would have probably made a zipper sewn in somewhere on one of the edges. If you would choose to make a fold like that, maybe a third snap in the center would be a good solution. I made one change at the end. I grabbed the edges and I have pinned them together, and I have sewn through all edges with a straight stitch, and I find that this looks actually kind of way more professional, and that way the pillowcase lays much flatter, and I actually like the result now even way more than what it looked before. And that's gonna be it for today. I hope that you guys enjoyed today's tutorial. If you are new here, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and you can also click on the bell icon if you want to get that notification whenever I upload new videos. Thank you all so much for watching. I love you guys so much. God bless you, and see you soon. Bye!